It's truly a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Wanda Wright, and I'm the Director for the Office for Veteran and Military Academic Engagement. I was in the Air Force for 26 years. Let me hear a shout out from the Air Force. Yep, whoop, whoop. Not that we don't love all the other branches. I've been at ASU for about 16 months, and so I'm very happy to be here to be the moderator for this illustrious panel. My life has been dedicated to service, both in the military and my work with veterans. Being in the military, I was active duty and Air National Guard, and so I'd like people to know that I have a lot of different faces, right? It's really great to be here to do this. And after retiring as a colonel from the Air Force, I was the director for the Arizona Department of Veterans Services for the state of Arizona. I worked for Governor Ducey as his cabinet member, and it really gave me a great insight into what veterans are experiencing across Arizona. There's a little more than 500,000 of them, and it's important that we hear their voices. So as the director for the Office for Veteran Military Academic Engagement, I invite you to visit our office downtown. We have a myriad of services and programs for active duty and veteran students. But today, we've come together to discuss the challenges and opportunities ahead for the Department of Defense. For Salute to Service, we are honored to have these top military leaders here to speak to us about their perspective on several issues. ASU often brings great speakers from across the world during this Salute to Service Week. I'm excited for this panel to share some of their insights, and I will give them a few minutes to introduce themselves before we begin the questions. Go right ahead, General.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Brigadier General Lonnie Branham. I'm the Land Component Commander of the Arizona Army National Guard. And so a little bit of background about me. I've been serving for 42 years. I started off enlisted in 1982, was enlisted for 13 years, went to Officer Candidate School, and branched into the field artillery and served in a myriad of positions since then, including military police and the acquisition corps. And I think what keeps me serving is I get to spend time with young soldiers, and that's motivating to me to continue to serve. And so on my civilian Army job, so the National Guard is a part-time job for me as a commander. It's a part-time job, but it's really a full-time job. But I also work for the Army and as a civilian, as an engineer for the Army on the Apache helicopter program. So I kind of get the best of both worlds. Okay, thanks.
Hey, Sundel's teammates, Mike Leisman, the brand new Deputy Commanding General at Fort Huachuca and the Intelligence Center of Excellence. Really excited to be here today. Oh, let's see, last couple of jobs before this, I was up at STRATCOM, really doing integrated deterrence and learning about the nuclear threats, and maybe that'll work a little bit into some of the questions today that we have here. That is an interesting job. Not one that Army folk get a lot. My Navy and Air Force brethren were definitely the dominant forces up there with a lot of bomber drivers and nuclear submarine drivers, and a couple of us Army guys running around keeping them honest. So that was good. And before that, I was the Senior Intelligence Officer for the Army National Guard. That's me in a nutshell. Glad to be here, and glad you're here too. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Sun Devils and ASU. Thank you for the invite. My name is Captain Randy Cruz, call sign SOC. I'm from the Naval Research Laboratory in D.C. For the first 20 years of my naval career, I was an operator. I was an E-2 Hawkeye NFO, so flew doing air battle management. That included some time going through test pilot school, Top Gun graduate, weapons and tactics instructor, dealing with Tomahawk missiles, and then taking command of a unit out to sea. About 6 years ago, I got into the world of S&T by way of NASA as the senior advisor to the head of NASA, and then that got me into defense S&T, looking at how we do science technology for the Navy and the Marine Corps. And so now I'm at the lab, and the next summer I'll take over as the commanding officer. Thanks for having me.
Good afternoon, everybody. Pete Abercrombie. I am the commander of the 56th Mission Support Group out at Luke Air Force Base. What that role is I consider myself pretty much the city manager. I have everything and anything that makes the base run and operate is pretty much under my control, whether that's cops, communications, civil engineers, it's contracting, HR, and the like. So before this, I was out at Transcom. I was the DLA liaison, so we were the nexus of logistics and transportation there, making sure we could deliver parts all around the world for whatever contingencies were going on. I'm a career logistician, been doing this 24 plus years, and I've been here at Luke for about 15 months.
Hey, good afternoon, Colonel John Nelson. My background, I've been in the Army for 29 years, entered active duty service as an enlisted tanker armor crewman, was commissioned through Officer Candidate School as an armor officer, and then after company command, I transitioned to the acquisition corps, so basically, developing, testing, and procuring equipment for the Army. Yuma Proving Ground is the Army's natural environments test center. Basically think of all, ground combat platforms, aerial combat platforms, aerial delivery of personnel and cargo, counter uncrewed aerial systems, and lot acceptance testing for all munitions.
Thank you. Just to note, there's a slide over there in case you don't remember all the titles. It's great. One thing I noted in all the bios, we have a very varied way that all of these gentlemen got commissioned. We have ROTC graduates, OTS graduates, Academy graduates, and to let all of you know, as ROTC students, there's a lot of ways that you can get that commission. So it's awesome to see. All right, given the current global climate, U.S. commanders are operating in a world marked by rising tensions and complex security threats, from cyber intrusion to large-scale geopolitical conflicts. The war in Ukraine has become a significant inflection point, bringing traditional military power into sharp focus. Meanwhile, the instability in the Middle East, recently intensified by events in Israel, has global security ramifications that may draw in additional forces and resources. The mounting influence of China with its expanding military footprint in the Pacific and strategic partnerships with Russia adds another layer to the U.S. defense outlook. China's advance in artificial intelligence, cyber capabilities, and military modernization challenges U.S. interests and allies, necessitating forward-thinking leadership and readiness from the U.S. military. These considerations are essential to understanding the challenges and opportunities U.S. commanders face in Arizona, a state with strategic importance in defense and military training. Against this backdrop, these questions are aimed to delve into the experiences, decisions, and strategies of Arizona's military commanders, revealing how they confront global complexities while managing local impacts and community relations. I just want to note, too, this is a public-facing forum. People are watching, so the commanders and leaders may have to sort of neutralize some of the speech that they have just to make sure they don't tattletale on some of the national security, right? All right, so we'll start with you, General. In a world where military forces face threats from state and non-state actors alike, as commanders you contend with both traditional and emerging challenges. Can you describe a significant leadership challenge you faced recently as a commander and how you navigated it?
All right, yeah, I think for the Army National Guard, the Arizona Army National Guard especially, so we have two missions basically. First is to be prepared to fight and win our nation's wars. That is our primary reason for existing. That's our primary mission. Our secondary mission is to be prepared to support the community and the state and the nation in time of crisis, local crisis. And so we have two missions, which poses a challenge sometimes for us. So we're trying to maintain soldiers, make sure units are prepared and ready to deploy and fight and win our nation's wars. We've got, over the past 2-3 years, we've probably had an average annual deployment of probably about 800 soldiers out of a total formation size of around 5,000. So you have a lot of soldiers deployed downrange supporting missions overseas. And then on top of that, you're trying to manage local crises that pop up. So pandemic support, prime example, when the pandemic happened, we had hundreds of soldiers deployed overseas. Now we're trying to assist the state and the local communities in managing the pandemic. Wildland firefighting support, flooding, you name it. So you're trying to balance all those while the soldiers that are not deployed, you're still trying to maintain readiness in preparation for deployment for those soldiers as well. It is a challenge at times trying to balance all of those demands at the same time. So how do we get after that? It's really just, it's day to day sometimes, trying to manage that and just trying to do the best you can. But you know, the deployments overseas is a no-fail. We've got to support those. The local state missions, those are no-fail missions. So sometimes you have to take risk in future deployment, so you cut back a little bit on some of the training plans that you have to do. But it's definitely a challenge trying to maintain that. I'll end. One thing I didn't mention earlier, I did graduate from ASU in 1988, so some of you heard that this morning. It's good to be back here. And so I will tell you, for the ASU students, you guys are getting a great education here. So it's great to be back at ASU, and there's been just a couple changes to the campus in 37 years.
Couple.
But yeah, just a couple. All right, thank you.
General Branham, can I ask one quick question about that? Have you had difficulty with recruitment? Does that add to the issue?
Yeah, recruiting is a challenge. I think that's probably true for all of the services.
Mm-hmm.
I think things are starting to, we're turning a corner, and I think we're seeing to have better success with recruiting. Retention is one of our big challenges in the National Guard. You know, the one weekend a month thing sometimes doesn't always pan out with all these deployments. So our soldiers are trying to balance the demands of a military career with a civilian career and a family. And it's tough. It's tough for those soldiers. And so some of them hanging on and continuing to serve, it's a challenge. And so retention sometimes is difficult for them. But definitely recruiting is, I think we're turning the corner on that. At least I hope we are. It seems like we are.
Great, thank you. General Leisman?
Yeah, so thanks, Lonnie, for the tactical. I'm going to take the discussion all the way to the other end of the problem set from my recent experience at STRATCOM, which is a combatant command. So we're going from your tactical and operational level all the way up. And the answer to the problem, well, let me kind of define the problem as General Cotton, who's the current commander of STRATCOM, sees it, our 4-star there. General Cotton will tell you that he needs to be able to fight or deter and, if necessary, fight 2 nuclear peers. That's new. We've always had the threat from the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, and now Russia. That's always been the threat, and it's certainly the acute threat as we see in Europe right now. Many of you have probably been reading vignettes coming out of Ukraine, seeing how President Putin used his nuclear arsenal to influence that war. But what we haven't experienced before is to have another existential threat to the United States. By existential, I mean can end us as a nation through nuclear warfare. And China is close, if not there now. And I'll even go so far as to say in this, keeping it G-rated here, that North Korea has the ability now to range parts of the continental United States. You'll hear that acronym as CONUS, with nuclear weapons, and hold U.S. Counter-value and counter-force targets at risk. So it's a serious problem. If you go back and read the National Defense Strategy, you'll see that the strategy put out by the Biden administration is integrated deterrence. Then I would answer your question in one word. I think our partnerships are exactly how, at the strategic level, the U.S. will leverage and counter the malign forces at the strategic level that threaten us. I'd also like to throw out to the younger folks in the room here that are maybe considering this, the acronym we're really talking about here is VUCA, and that stands for a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I need you all to put yourselves into situations, and cadet leaders here in the room, put your younger cadets in situations. It can be on a ropes course, it can be orienteering, it can be in a classroom, but put your younger soldiers that you are training, your younger cadets that you are training, in volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situations. Because if you're not ready for that, then you need to get yourself ready, because we are not handing you a very certain problem set. We're handing you something pretty ambiguous, and we're going to need your creativity and your innovation to solve it when we hand the reins over to you here in a few years. Thanks.
Thank you, General. Captain Cruz.
Yes, that's a very, very good question. The problem set will continue and will always change. It's dynamic and even more so than ever. So what I would offer, I'll take it from the stretch a little bit back down to the, and I'll give you an example if you'll indulge me. It's about the basics, and I'll give you an example. I recall a time when I was on the aircraft carrier getting ready to launch an airplane. I had an E6 in charge of our quality insurance, and there was something wrong with the airplane. But it wasn't black and white. It was a judgment call. And in the meantime, this was my last airplane. I needed this airplane. The admiral, the airman commander needed this airplane to take off. And everybody was looking at this 46, trying to make a decision. What do I do? In his heart of hearts, it was down. But you got the maintenance master chief saying, well, is it up or down, shipmate? You know, kind of like, you know what the right answer is. So I had to step in as the commanding officer and say, hey, look, this is in this world of emerging and changing threats, you got to be solid at the basics. This sailor was qualified. I gave him a designation letter to make that call and to make it on his own. And so at the end of the day, we missed that sortie. I caught a lot of grief, but I will do that. And I encourage you to do the same by being solid at the basics. In this changing, ever-changing world, you got to be strong at the basics to have that strong foundation to choose that right course of action. It wasn't easy. It was a challenge. It was not a very comfortable conversation to explain to the Air Wing commander, to the admiral, and to the theater commander why we didn't have that E2 airborne for those few hours. Be solid at the basics.
Thanks for that great example. Colonel Abercrombie.
Yes, thank you. How many of you guys have heard the term, the homeland is no longer a sanctuary? Has anybody heard that? A couple folks? So as we talk about going into that next fight, right, we have to change our mindset of what it means that the homeland is not a sanctuary. China has the capabilities non-kinetically to affect every single installation, not only here in Arizona, but across the globe that we fight from. Our power projection platforms are at risk. And we have made a lot of decisions probably over the last 20 years, 30 years, where we consolidated for business case reasons, right? It's cheaper if we consolidate and put things in one location. But by doing that, we have now accepted a risk that maybe in the next fight we don't want to have, because now we don't have the resources available locally to do what it is that we need to do to project our power to go maybe to the Pacific and fight that next war. So one of the challenges we are facing that we are looking at specifically at Luke is what does our resiliency look like? If something were to happen here locally, if the power were to go out, if the water were to get shut down. We had Colonial Pipeline. How many folks remember Colonial Pipeline, right? Where we had somebody hijack an entire fuel pipeline on the East Coast and shut down fuel transfers. That could happen. How do we launch our jets? How do we launch ships? If we don't have access to the resources, we need to do that. So as you guys are coming into the service, that's something you guys will be faced with. There are many challenges that sit out there based upon decisions we thought were right at the time 15, 20 years ago that maybe we need to undo now, because those risks that we're assuming have gotten much greater with this new peer competitor. So that's one of the challenges we're facing. That's one of the things that we're trying to dig through and figure out, because there is no room to be standing on the sideline when the balloon goes up. So we've got to be resilient and strong and ready to take the fight to the enemy.
Thank you, Colonel Nelson, or Colonel Abercrombie. Colonel Nelson?
Yes, so Yuma Proving Ground is the workforce is primarily 1,500 civilian personnel. You're talking test engineers, test officers, and then all the associated support staff. So when it comes to what's going on in the world and our workforce, it's the challenge of providing the why, the purpose. You know, why are we here, and how to motivate the workforce to do what they're doing in support of those challenges. So what I try to do is, in the face of that challenge, is just to link the national defense strategy all the way down to what we're doing at our level in order to help modernize the Army to face those threats. You know, China, the pacing challenge, and the acute threat of Russia, or whatever it is. But then what I found out when I hit the ground was that there were some folks on part of the workforce that were not motivated. Their morale was kind of low, and it was because they weren't the ones that were going down range, pulling triggers, blowing stuff up, which is really fun. and they had a lot of those folks had no idea what we were doing downrange. So it started with some videos, showing them what we were doing, showing them cool videos of the other guys blowing stuff up. But I also got those folks downrange to where they could actually be on the range, see those types of things. So just it's a one team, one fight type of mentality. But that's the challenge I faced with respect to this.
Great. So it really just shows that leaders really need to be innovative. They need to be able to think complexly about the situation and environment and have great integrity. Yeah, great. Thank you. All right, so we just heard the term Second Cold War. And so this question is a little bit about that as the first Cold War had a lot to do with nukes and technology and not really actually fighting, but kind of having the weaponry to keep each side balanced, if you will. So as technology becomes an integral part of defense, especially with AI developments, hypersonic drones, and advanced weaponry from adversarial nations, how does your service leverage technology to enhance mission readiness?
All right, so I'm going to take a little different approach on this one. So technology is evolving pretty rapidly, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that before we can incorporate technology in any one of the services, we have to make sure that it's been tested, right? We've got to make sure it's interoperable, okay? Imagine a radio system that we can't talk to the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, or each other. So it's got to be interoperable. It's got to be lethal. We have to validate its lethality. We have to validate the survivability. We're not going to put a pilot in an aircraft that isn't survivable, or at least we know what the limitations are. So all of those, and sustainable, that's a key one too. So we can't just have units going out and services and just going buying whatever off-the-shelf technology is out there, because it hasn't gone through that. So I'll talk for the Army National Guard. We're not going out and buying things. That's more of a push than a pull. So the Army Futures Command, for example, is the one that the Army, that's what's doing a lot of the developmental work effort and the testing and pushing that down to units in the formation. That way we're sure that it's been tested, validated, it's sustainable, interoperable, okay, all those things have been done. So I would say that, for us in the Army National Guard, the force is going through a period of modernization, but that's not just the Army National Guard. That's the Army, the total Army, the active Army, the Army Reserve, the Army National Guard, all of us together. So we're all fighting with the same equipment that can all talk to one another, and we know the expectation of how it's going to perform. And so our ability to use technology is really basically what's pushed to us. So we're not going out and buying anything specifically because of those reasons and funding limitations. Could you imagine if every unit, every service is going out and buying some whiz-bang thing off the shelf and everybody has their own thing, and the amount of money that would be spent, it would be enormous, and then half of it probably wouldn't even work together. So I hope I answered the question adequately. All right.
All right, General Leisman?
Thanks, Lonnie. Yeah, every army in the world to be successful has to do three things, really any military force, but I'll just keep it green here for a second. You got to shoot, you got to move, and you got to communicate. And I won't give us a grade here in this open format, but I would tell you that if we got a report card, I would say the Army gets much higher grades right now on shooting and moving because we don't have assured comms. Some of you probably heard of a guy named General Milley. I remember when he was the chief of the Army, I was reading a paper he was pushing, even back as far as 17 or 18, talking about assured comms. You have to be able to communicate. It's a third of the equation. And without it, the shooting and moving gets pretty difficult pretty quick. So talking about technological fixes, the Army's working on it in two ways. We refer to it as C2. You guys probably are tracking that acronym, Command and Control. And so the immediate fix, the long-term fix is at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and they're working on that right now. But the short-term fix that we're working on in several of our units, 18th Airborne Corps, 101st 3ID, come to mind is C2 Fix. And what we're trying to do is get the network right, get our command posts more survivable, smaller, have less systems that are stacked and more systems that are stovepiped and more systems that can talk to each other. And then really at the edge of the combat zone, we call it the edge right now, or the tactical edge. We want to get really simple. And the Army loves von Clausewitz, so get to know that name. But, I remember reading about von Clausewitz, and it's not one of the more famous quotes, but it's appropriate here. General von Clausewitz talks about this, and he says the idea is not to out-complex the enemy, but really to outdo the enemy with simplicity, and I think that's where we're headed with C2 Fix, and I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, General. It is without a doubt that we are concerned about AI developments, hypersonics, drones, and counter-drone activity. We know about that. We are working on it. So I'll leave it at that. But what I will also tell you that if you get a chance for all the midshipmen and then for all the Marine Corps students out there, if you haven't had a chance to read the CNO's NAV plan or the Commandant's planning guidance, you'll note that the key theme there is it's got to be a joint fight. Especially with the advanced technology that we have, it's got to be joint fight. So let's stop pretending. Some of the technology we are using is looking at what's called LVC, Live Virtual Construct Training. A lot of reps and sets will be required. Right now we're able to do synthetic training, i.e. we're connecting ships to airplanes, to other systems, and we're putting them through some pretty intense war games. We have to do that over and over again so that when we have to, it becomes muscle memory, and we are ready. But just like most things, it's perishable, so we'll have to continue to keep doing that. And with things like LVC and synthetic training, it allows us to do more and more. It is more cost-effective than trying to get a ship out to sea, get airplanes flying and burning fuel. So if we can do that using some technology, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yes, for the Air Force, we're a service built on innovation, and I think we will still do that. We have a lot of acquisition programs that are ongoing right now that are obviously very important for the future fight. When you talk about the nuclear triad, right, two-thirds of that resides in the Air Force, whether that's with the nuclear missiles, whether it's the B-21, the new bomber. We've got a lot of purchase power that is right now being invested in those future technologies. We're also reinvesting in the KC-46, right, which is supposed to take, the KC-10 is retired. We're supposed to be starting to retire the KC-135. And all these things are bringing new and exciting capabilities to the fight because that's what it's going to require. But these acquisition programs take a very long time. And so oftentimes what we find is as we're going through these purchasing, years and years of purchasing these things, right? The technology is changing, so we're always trying to reinsert that new technology into these new systems that we're bringing on board. So you guys will come in at an exciting time in the Air Force because you'll be seeing a lot of new stuff rolling into the inventory, but we'll still be flying stuff like the B-52 is going to fly for 100 years. That would be like the Wright flyer flying on September 11th. That's how old our airplanes are going to be. Some of our airplane platforms are going to be. So we're not going to get out of the woods quickly because all these solutions cost a lot of money, which there's not enough to go around to satisfy every service's needs, right? So we have to, the decision makers are always making those trade-offs on what's next. What I will tell you from the innovation for mission readiness at Luke, one of the things I'll point out is, and we may get into a little bit later, is the training, how we do training there. If you think of Luke, you think of planes in the sky, and you think about our pilots having to get down to Gila Bend and do their training down there. We're trying to move more out of being in the cockpit day in and day out to more of simulator training because we can do so much more realistic training in that kind of environment. You can put more planes together in a virtual environment than you can even put down on the Barium Goldwater range. We have to train and we have to bring these technologies to bear because we can't do it all sometimes in person. We just can't find the space. We can't find the resources. We can't connect to the person halfway around the globe that we want to do a flight simulator mission with, right, and train together. We can do that over distances of miles that we couldn't possibly do trying to get everybody maybe into southern Arizona. So we've got a lot of things that we're trying to get after and try and innovate our way to the next fight.
I'm going to ask this, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have any sense about Space Force and the technology that's coming that way? And it's okay if you don't. I didn't ask the question.
I don't.
It's okay.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay. Colonel Nelson.
Okay, so the Army's always been trying to figure out how to get faster at observing, orienting, deciding, and acting, so that OODA loop. So, looking at, what General Leisman was talking about, the C2 fix, the Army is trying to leverage that system to close the gap, I guess, between the sensor and the shooter and make it more rapid. One example is using semi-autonomous drones and vehicle platforms to then, identify targets and actually collaborate with each other, but then also leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning to make decisions and get that identified target to the right shooter, so that you're not oversaturating a target with a bunch of shooters, but you're just you're being more efficient with the weapon systems that you have at your disposal.
Great, thank you. All right, our next question, which Colonel Abercrombie kind of started, adapting training to evolving threats from near-peer competitors. The U.S. military must remain agile as it faces both conventional and cyber threats, particularly from near-peer competitors like Russia and China. How do you ensure your education and training programs remain relevant to these evolving threats?
All right, yeah, hey, tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, are evolving constantly, not just ours, but the threats out there, right? They're seeing what we're doing, and they're adapting. You can see it, Russia, Ukraine, you can see daily TTPs are changing. There's no way you can wait for doctrine to come down formally like we normally get it. It's going to catch up eventually, but you can't wait for that. So for the future junior officers in the room, you've got to join military associations, okay? They push out regular journals, publications, read. You got to stay current in your trade craft, okay? And that's reading those publications, the journals, the professional articles that are put out there, after action reviews from different training scenarios and engagements, things that are happening overseas, real world. You got to be a reader. You got to read those things. Can't wait for it to get pushed to you, okay? We talk about the push and the pull, okay? This is one where you're just going to pull it and start training yourself, okay? And then your soldiers, okay? So if you future platoon leaders for those in the Army, yeah, it's up to you at that point. Yet when doctrine comes down, then you're gonna follow that doctrine, but you can't wait for it, okay? You can't. It's too dynamic. It's too dynamic. Things are going to change rapidly, more so than they ever have in the history of warfare. So you've got to stay in front of it. So I would also say, I think Captain Cruz mentioned earlier the joint fight. I think I told some of the cadets this morning, but I'll say it, right? The Army, the Air Force, the Navy, we poke fun at one another all the time, right? The Marines poke fun at everybody. All kidding aside, we are all part of the same team. We are all in the same fight, okay? And we need each other to conduct multi-domain operations. Okay? Every single one of us and every single service, Coast Guard included, right? Space Force, we're all part of that team. And so poke fun at one another, but just remember at the end of the day, we are all in the same teams. And there's no way the Army's going to do it on its own. There's no way the Air Force is going to do it on its own, the Navy, the Marines. Okay, we need each other. So just always remember that. Keep that in the back of your mind. That's important. So thank you.
So I had a really technical answer, and I'm going to completely go off script here. So both Sergeant Major and my Lieutenant Aide-de-Camp over there are freaking right now, but it'll be okay. The other day, my wife and I got up really early. I needed to get down to the gym on Monday morning, and I was blessed to go down to our track and see our young 35 MOS soldiers, intelligence soldiers, out at 5:30 in the morning doing PT. And my wife asked me an interesting question. She's typical of my spouse question, I guess, but she said, this looks like what we would see at Fort Benning, honey. Are these infantry soldiers? And I thought about that for a second. And I'm like, they are. Now, I'm going to tell you why. Physical fitness is where we must adapt in our training. We've been, for the last 20 or so years, those of us that have been in the military have mostly been patrolling from FOBs where we had bunkers, where we had set defenses, and we had ways of intercepting rounds that were incoming. The threat of artillery in Ukraine is killing more people on the battlefield like it always has in every conventional war that's ever been fought. It is why it's called the king of battle. And if you are not physically fit enough to jump your TOC, to go up to the flot, if you're an MI soldier, just hypothetically, rig an antenna, collect on the enemy, get those signals back, de-rig that antenna, and move over and over and over and over again before that counter-artillery drone can spot you and put rounds on target and wipe you and your formation off the face of this earth. If you're not physically fit enough to do that about 18 times a day in a 24-hour period, you're not ready. So while we adapt all this technology, do not forget to adapt your physical fitness and be ready to move as well as shoot and communicate on the battlefield.
When I think about training, there's three aspects, right? There's the person, the sailor, soldier, the guardian, whatever the case may be, the equipment, and then there's the tactics of it all. And typically when we do mission planning for, let's say, for a strike, you present COAs, course of action. There's the most dangerous, the most likely, and then what I like to call, what would you do if you're the opponent? You got to think about those things in order to be current and make sure that the training is relevant. I remember when I first joined my first squadron, I was so excited and I was going to get engaged, but I told my fiancée, it's just a 6-month deployment. Well, what I didn't know was that there was 3 months of workups and training. So out of the year, when I thought I was going to be gone for 6 months, I was actually out of the house for 9. All that to say that not only do you need to vary the training, you need to do a lot of it. You need to do a lot of it in order to be not just mission ready, but mission capable.
All right. So for the Air Force, there's a lot of changes coming. If you think about how the Army deploys, it's going to deploy as a brigade or it's going to deploy as a division. If you're going to go out with the Navy, you're going to go out as a carrier battle group, right? If you go out in the Air Force, currently you just go out as you, oftentimes, right? There is no unit of action, as we call it. There is no unit that goes forward from the Air Force. And the Air Force is changing that. They're actually standing up what's called deployment combat wings, which is a unit of action that the Air Force can then pick up and move forward to a combat zone. So what that means is as we change how the Air Force looks, it's also going to change how we train and how we fight. And so that's going to be a holistic change all the way down. So for this unit of action, we have stood up at Luke. It's called the 13th CAPS, Combat Air Base Squadron. And we have now, instead of having individuals who go do training individually or with one or two folks, we are training like the Army does and like the Navy does. We train as a unit so that when you get in a fight, there's some familiarity. You know who your battle buddy is. You know that when things hit the fan, you know exactly what they're going to do and they know exactly what you're going to do. And there's no questioning. That's not the time to start figuring out who knows what and who's going to do what. You just need to execute. And so the Air Force is changing to this model. And so we are working our way through it right now at Luke, but it's actually changing across the entire Air Force. So this will be something as you guys roll out into the Air Force, you'll see it'll be just how the Air Force is going to be constructed. It's going to be about a 4 to 6 year process to get us to that end state, but the changes are coming and they're happening. And I think it's going to be a good thing because it's that esprit de corps, that unit morale that, we're going to get in the foxhole together and go fight. There's a lot to that is, I think, that is currently missing in the Air Force because we are very siloed and very functional in how we do stuff. And we're going to break down those silos and you're going to be a team. And it doesn't matter. You may have a cop, you may have a cook, and you may have a fuels troop all in this little team doing ACE concept is what we call Agile Combat Employment in some far off reaches of the Pacific. And so it's coming, and it's going to be a good thing.
All right, so for the Army, it's important to train against relevant and realistic threats. And the way they've done that over the years is the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, where you take a brigade or a division minus size element, you take them out there, and you kind of fight your Super Bowl, kind of a qualification exercise before you deploy. And you're fighting against the world premier opposing force that's supposed to replicate that enemy, so present those relevant and realistic threats. So what's happening now is that there are some really effective mechanisms that are, gaining lessons learned in the European theater of operations and getting those back to those test centers, and then equipping the Blue 4 or the brigade that's out there, as well as the opposing force with those realistic threats to make sure that they're training against the most relevant and realistic threat. So from the testing perspective, we do the same thing. So we have actual threat vehicles, threat emitting radars, so that pilots can go up against those things, the real thing. Making sure that we understand what frequencies are going to be posed against us and things like that, so that we're testing against the most realistic and relevant threat.
Thank you very much. Those are great answers. All right, we'll move on to military-civilian engagement. Growing military-civilian collaborations are necessary, and we've seen recently that it's become more necessary as time's going on, especially as the U.S. builds strategic alliance regions affected by international conflict and rising tensions with major powers like China. How do you engage with the civilian community, and what initiatives have proved most effective?
Okay, so for the Arizona Army National Guard, I think the best way that we engage with the community is just being present when they need us, right? Mm-hmm. So when the community needs us, we're there, always ready, always there. That's the motto of the Army National Guard. For example, during the COVID pandemic, we had well over 1,000 soldiers and airmen supporting the pandemic response throughout the state of Arizona, whether that was COVID testing, vaccinations, helping out on the Native American population reservation, getting them PPE, you name it. The soldiers and the airmen were thoroughly engaged in that mission. Wildland firefighting, there's no shortage of firefighters and wildland fires these days, but also, flooding response. One of the recent ones a couple months ago, we had Havasupai up north in the Grand Canyon. There was about 100 plus civilians that got trapped up there due to unexpected flooding. And so we got the call, we sent up Blackhawk. Blackhawk went into the canyon at night. So you can imagine that the dangerous situation that posed, but they went in there, they landed. They took out 10, they went back, got 10 more, they got 44 out that night, went back first light and got out the other 60. So I think that's what, for us, it's being present for the community when the state of Arizona or the citizens of the state need us, that we're there. And I think that's the best way that we engage with the community. And one thing I wanted to say, before we were talking weapon systems, I give a shout out. One of our best weapon systems that we have is our non-commissioned officer corps. We talked a little bit about it this morning, but hands down, I think that by far is our most dangerous weapon system that we have in the United States military.
Thanks for adding that. I think that is very important. We acknowledge that. Great. General Leisman.
Yeah, thanks. So I kind of designed this answer at the strategic level, how to talk to Congress and everything, and I'm gonna go off script again here and talk to the folks in the room. So when I was sitting in your seat, and people would come up to me and say, "Hey, thanks for your military service," and that like doubled after 9/11, by the way. I would just say thank you or oh thanks or try to stand up, shake their hand. I'm going to keep my answer here real short. I'm going to challenge you with a new answer. And you've probably already experienced it, but if you haven't, when they come up to you in the airport, when you're in uniform, and they say, "Hey, thank you for your service," I'd like you to stand up, look them back, and say, "You are worth it."
Dang, that was awesome. Thank you. Captain Cruz.
Not sure how you follow that, but
Yeah.
I'm going to use that as well. Our engagement with civilians. So the Secretary of the Navy has these benchmarks for working with small businesses. So we force working with other entities. There's a quote: "Rising tide lifts all boats," and so there's a lot of interest in private-public partnerships. So we're invested in a lot of that. And to be honest, as I've been at the Naval Research Lab, which hosts 4,000 civilians and like 30 military folks, I've gotten more and more engaged with the civilian sector, although they're government. But through them, I'm seeing them reach out to universities for grants. In fact, Arizona State's got quite a few that are doing with the Navy. In fact, some of you students may be involved with that with some of your work. But we need everyone's efforts. We need industry. We need academia, not just military, to rise this tide to lift all boats.
So at Luke Air Force Base, we have 4 lines of efforts. Their quality of life, training, infrastructure, and the 4th one is partnerships. So our boss has said from the get-go, partnerships is very important to us accomplishing our mission. And partnerships for us at Luke are 2 things, right? We have an international partners there. We have 5 nations that are flying the F-35 right alongside our U.S. military members in the F-35. So we have an international community that we take care of. But we also have a community initiatives team. We have a team of about 5 individuals. Their sole purpose for being at Luke is to go engage the community. It's to find those partnerships. It's to find those areas where we can come together and come up with a solution together so that we both benefit from whatever that solution is, right? We don't want to just take from the community, and we don't want to be at the whims, right? They'll make a decision that could have negative consequences possibly for our installation. And so they're out in the community every single day making those partnerships happen. And so as a mission support group commander, I see it every day. We have partnerships where I have firefighters who are going off the base to help, put out local fires if need be. We have those agreements in place that we do that. We're out there helping support the community. Same with the police department. Anything that requires that collaboration and that partnership, we are there because it's important.
Yeah, I just want to add, yesterday I was at Blue Horizon Elementary School to give a presentation about Veterans Day, and many of your troops showed up yesterday, and the children were so excited to see them and talk to them. It was just amazing. So thank you for that piece of the community engagement that you're doing.
Absolutely. We got to go meet them where they are in that community, right? We're open. We say, hey, come visit the base, but I think it's oftentimes more important to be out in the community, go to their spaces, because to your point, the feedback is amazing, right? When you go to their space and you're taking the time out of your day to appreciate what they're doing, it comes back to you tenfold.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. Colonel Nelson.
All right, so from a Yuma Proving Ground perspective, we attack this in a variety of ways. First, it's important to have really good relationships, good solid relationships with your local, state, and federal officials and agencies, so that you can make sure that, to include the tribes, so that you can make sure that you can accomplish the mission for the nation, but also take care of the environment, be good stewards of the environment. So working with the Arizona Fish and Game, people like that. On the law enforcement and firefighting side, mutual support agreements. There's a wildfire just off of Yuma Proving Ground. We're going to go help those guys out. There's somebody stranded on 95. We're gonna have our law enforcement go over there and help the Yuma County Sheriff's Office out. Another way is outreach. So, the 1,500 folks that I just talked about that work at Yuma Proving Ground, well, they live in the city of Yuma. They live in Yuma County, so they're part of the community. So it's important for us to stay engaged with the community, do outreach events, STEM events. It's mutually beneficial because, if we're doing a STEM outreach, we might that person might end up being a test engineer out there at Yuma someday, be inspired to do that. But there's a Veterans Day parade, on Veterans Day coming up. So just staying engaged with the community and making sure that you can benefit them as well as them benefit you.
Great. So that concludes my questions. Let's open the floor to our cadets to ask questions to our illustrious leaders. Do we have any questions?
If you don't ask us questions, we get to ask you questions. And I was all deep into the U.S. Constitution this morning, so let's get some questions going.
Me too. I was in the national strategy this morning. So,
Cadet Flores, good afternoon. Going back to the artificial intelligence topic, I had a question. It says, how is emerging technology such as artificial intelligence transforming the way intelligence is gathered within our military, and what threats does that pose? But also, how do we make sure that these systems are effective and secure?
Yeah, I think I caught most of that. It was basically artificial intelligence, and how are we going to use it?
How do we gather intelligence like within our military, and how do we make sure that it's secure and effective?
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, all right. So you're going to hear human in the loop, a lot of things like that. I'll just take a step back. So right now, through 20 years of counterintelligence operations, as we now transition into a term you're going to hear a lot, LISCO, multi-domain operations, fighting in a LISCO, which is a large-scale combat operation, or back to large conventional battles. What we've done is we've built more sensors, more satellites, more human beings trained to see things on the field, more sensors, more antennas than we can do with the data. So here's where AI fits in. We use AI to take thousands and thousands, I would go higher and say billions of bits of data, and cull it down so that then a human being can look at it. So let's take this, okay? You've decided you're making so much money in ROTC that you're going to buy a car, okay? Right? It's $500 a month when you're a senior. And by the way, we all just got $100 a month when we were seniors. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to let Google shorten that list of cars that are available so that you're not driving to every single lot, right? I mean, and you're going to cull it down, you're going to put in the type of car you want. Well, AI is doing a lot of that for you right now to get that down to that car that you want. Now, you're going to end up from 5,000, let's just say you're a Chevy Mustang person, 5,000 Chevy Mustangs that are the exact color, exact year, and mileage range that you want. There's still 5,000 of them, but now you want to know, hey, is it close? Can I get to it? Would the bank finance it? And all this. So you're gonna cull that list down using AI down to about 10. Now we put the human in the loop, and those final 10 you're going to take a look at for things that AI can't determine in that car. Maybe it's a specific color, or you like the wheels, things that AI can't determine. Or there's just a field, and you're going to go test drive it, right? So you're totally in the loop, but only after we've shortened that field down to something that's manageable and makes you agile. Imagine if you had to look at all 5,000 cars. Now you just looked at 10 and made your decision. And in the case of military operations, you've looked at 10 things out on the battlefield instead of 5,000, and you've gone to the commander and said, shoot these 3, or affect these 3, after you looked at your list of 10 instead of 5,000. And whoever can do that fastest, find that car, find that effect that commander needs fastest with AI, with that human in the loop making that final decision based on experience and maybe even just some intuition, will win. And that's why we have to be first with AI and machine learning. Does that help? Okay, thanks for the question.
I think it's a great question. If I could just add on. I won't go into too much detail on how we're using it, but there's definitely an appetite to use it. I know I run the risk of bringing this up here at a university, but I know the students are busy, but if you get the chance to read a book called Brave New Words by the guy that created the Khan Academy, he talks about AI and how it's been used, and he describes people like myself who are like, we can't use that to write reports, can't use that. I think we're coming close to a point where if you haven't got there, it's here. So we need to figure out how to use it. So your question is right, and perhaps down the road you'll see just how we're doing it. But if you've got some ideas, absolutely float that forward. Great question.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Cadet Miranda. I'm commissioning into the National Guard as a 35 Alpha. So my question is, how do you manage the demands of the Army during like the short, 1 weekend a month drill? And are you ever off work? So what is the work-life balance there?
Yeah, hey, great question. One of the questions that we didn't get to, but I'll kind of weave that in here. We talk about resilience, and a big part of resilience, especially in the National Guard, where you're you have a civilian career path that you're going, you have a military career path that you're taking, and you have your family. And when you're early in your career, right, family demands may be light. Maybe you don't have any children yet. Your civilian career, maybe just entry level, so you don't have maybe a lot of responsibilities yet. Your military career, not a lot of responsibilities. But over time, all three of those will start to increase. As you take promotions at work in your military career, those demands start to become more and more. You start having kids, now all of a sudden you're finding yourself exponentially busy. And so you're trying to balance all three of those, and it's different, it's difficult. When I go talk to soldiers, I use the analogy of a three-legged step stool. And you're sitting on this stool, and one of those legs is your civilian career, one's your military career, and one's your family. And as the demands of your military and civilian career continue to increase, you'll be challenged and tempted to start cutting off the leg of that leg that represents the family. But I would warn you not to do that, because as soon as you do that, you're going to topple over on that stool. So you've got to always, your family's always going to be there for you. When you talk about resilience, your family, your friends, they're the ones that are going to help you get through the tough times. So don't shortchange that leg of the stool. You got to take some risk in your civilian job and take a little in your military career. I will tell you, it's tough. 42 years, I've been a traditional National Guard soldier. I've had a civilian military career, civilian and military career, and a family, and balance all three. It is tough, I will tell you. I empathize with you, but you can do it. But you have to be smart about how you balance that. So it's challenging. It's a great question, though.
Yeah, look, I'd like to add, so I was in the Air National Guard for 21 years, and I would just ask you to also look at being full-time Guard. It does make the balance a little easier when you're there all the time. It's tough to kind of maneuver a other job plus Guard plus family. So just consider that as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We have time for one more. Microphone over here. Oh, go ahead. We'll take two more. We'll get you. Go ahead.
Morning, gentlemen. Good morning, ma'am, or afternoon. So my question is, to what scale do you believe artificial intelligence will be integrated into the joint forces, and how important of a role do you think it will play coming into the future generations?
I think that the scaling question, these are great questions. It's TBD. Well, let me ask you this. Have you gotten into one of those cars that's driverless? Yeah. How many of you are good with that? How many of you are still a little bit nervous about that? Yeah. Until we can all be on the same page, we're gonna have that challenge. The general talks about human in the loop, so we're gonna. It'll be a while, I think. So, good question.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Good afternoon, ma'am. Another AI question, actually. So, as technology advances, ethical dilemmas also arise with it, especially with drones and AI implementation into combat situations. What are some things that you have all heard about addressing these ethical implications, and do you have any examples that you can share with us today?
That's a great question.
I mean, the only thing I would caution is the accuracy of the data, right? Because you're going to be, if you use AI and that's going to formulate you to make a decision, maybe you're going to strike a target based on that data. You've got to have something that makes sure that data is valid, right? Because I'm telling you, the enemy's going to do the same thing we're going to do, right? If I can spoof the data that they're using to make decisions, I'm going to push them fraudulent data and to make their decisions. So you've got to have something that validates that data. Otherwise, you will have yourself an ethical dilemma, and you won't even know it because you just hit a school with a missile that you thought you were taking out a target. So that's my only caution on AI, is that we've got to make sure we have some checks and balances in there. Good question.
Thank you. That concludes our panel. Can we please give a hand to these great leaders? Those are awesome answers.